everyone, and welcome back to Ancient History Jewelry Stories, your favorite niche history podcast, where at this point you are probably begging me to stop talking about women jewelers of the arts and crafts movement. That's right, this is now episode 4 in this series because I could not stop finding women to add to my list, and hopefully this will be the last one. I did not want to drag this topic out further into October, so any of the women left on my list that I cannot cover in this episode will be women who we do not have any info about aside from pictures of their beautiful jewelry. So for those women, I'm going to be making a separate video for my Patreon subscribers. That should be up next week. And hopefully that will be enough to cover all of the women that I've discovered since I started this series last month. Next month in October, we are going to continue talking about influential women jewelers, but we are going to be talking about women who were influential during the 20th century. Some of the women we're talking about today were jewelers during the 20th century, but their work is still firmly rooted in arts and crafts design, so I felt that they were more appropriately placed in this series. As always, if you are listening, there is also a video version of this podcast available. The video version can be seen on YouTube and Spotify. My YouTube channel is moonhoney.jewelry. And if you are content just listening to the audio-only version, which I don't blame you for, I'm an audio podcast kind of girl myself, I do ask that you at least Google a few of these women's beautiful pieces so you can get a sense of what we're talking about, because a lot of what we're discussing, specifically in this episode, is how their work can be differentiated from one another. I'm going to spare you all of the intro and plugs until the end of the episode because hopefully you are not coming in blind. And if you are, I ask you to please, at least go back and listen to part 1 of this series, where I break down what the arts and crafts movement was and why there were so many women jewelers. By now, you have probably also noticed that there is a flamingo leering over my shoulder. In fact, there are 2. I moved my workroom into what was formerly our bedroom, and I'm actually sitting at Mr. Moonhoney's desk right now, hence the large speaker behind me. I'm still working out the kinks of where to place the camera, how to get the lighting right. This is a much smaller room than I'm used to filming in, but flamingos. For everyone who is about to comment that they like my wallpaper, thank you. It's actually hand-painted. Mr. Moonhoney and I did this based on a 1950s paint-by-numbers painting. He is a professional painter. I did paint this with him, so I will take credit for how beautiful it is. Thank you very much. I do love it, and while I'm sad not to be sleeping next to my flamingos anymore, it does make me very happy to have them in my workspace. All right, now to the topic at hand. We are finally at the end of what has turned out to be 4 episodes about influential women jewelers of the arts and crafts movement. As I've stated in previous episodes, I thought I could do this in 1 episode and devote the 2nd episode to women of the 20th century, but it turned out that there were just so many more women making jewelry in this design movement than I ever anticipated. And if you've listened to previous episodes, which hopefully you are if you have gotten this far, you will know that it's because the arts and crafts movement was very open to women artisans. It was a movement that was not only welcoming to women, but it uplifted and fostered their creative talents. So my list kept growing as I kept discovering more and more women who made beautiful jewelry during this time period. In past episodes, we have covered Marie Zimmerman, Florence Carey Kohler, Charlotte Newman, aka Mrs. Philip Newman, Ida Lord Dixon, Georgie Gaskin, Elizabeth Copeland, Mary Thu, Jessie King, and Rhoda Wager. And in this episode, we're continuing with 4 more women, which is more than I have on my list, but these are the ones we have the most information about. We're going to be talking about May Morris, Dorrie Nossiter, Sybil Dunlop, and Ella Napier. The ones that I will not be able to get to in this episode are Amy Sendheim, Phoebe Triquare, and Ernestine Mills. I will be making a video for my Patreon followers about those 3 women and the beautiful work that they produced that will be up sometime next week. So with the short introduction over, let's get straight to these talented women and the incredible works they produced. We're going to start this episode by talking about the nepo baby of the arts and crafts movement, May Morris. Mary May Morris was born on March 25th, 1862 in London, England. She was the daughter of pre-Raphaelite painter and veritable titan of the arts and crafts movement, William Morris, and his wife Jane Burden, who was an embroiderer and artist's model. William Morris is often cited as being one of the artists responsible for starting the arts and crafts movement, and whether or not you agree, you can certainly give him credit for being one of the better-known designers who was working during this time, and he left an indelible mark on the design movement as a whole. He was not only a painter, but a prolific designer, and his wallpaper and fabric prints are still incredibly popular today. If you look at a few of his prints, you are sure to recognize at least one or two of them. It's been over 100 years and people are still crazy for William Morris's designs. Despite having incredibly well-known parents, we actually don't know very much about May Morris's early life. We do know that in 1878, she enrolled in the National Art Training School, which was a precursor to the Royal School of Art, and in 1885, at the age of 23, she became the director of the embroidery department in her father's business, Morris & Company. Her father's business was originally Morris, Marshall, Faulkner & Company, and it was a furnishing and decorative arts manufacturer and retailer that was started by William Morris and friends of his from the pre-Raphaelite group. Eventually, it turned into Morris & Company, and by the time that May took over, she was already an incredibly adept and very talented embroiderer. In fact, embroidery is what she is most known for. Many people do not know that she also designed and made jewelry. She is said to be responsible for some of the finest examples of embroidery made during the latter half of the 19th century. Unfortunately, as is so often the case when women work closely alongside men who were more famous than them, much of her work is mistakenly attributed to her father. She was responsible for the design and execution of many designs during her time as the head of the embroidery department, but a lot of these are attributed simply to William Morris and not May herself. In 1886, she fell in love with Henry Halliday Sparling, who was the secretary of the Socialist League. I did mention in the very first episode that the arts and crafts movement included a lot of socialists. I mean, a shitload of socialists. You can basically think of it as a socialist design movement. Her mother had her misgivings about May getting involved with someone who had such extreme political views, but May didn't care. She went ahead and married Henry anyway. They married in 1890, although the marriage did not last very long, and they were divorced by 1898. After her divorce, May did return to her maiden name. In 1907, May co-founded the Women's Guild of Arts because the Art Workers Guild did not let women join. The Women's Guild of Arts quickly went on to become the leading association for women artists and craftswomen, providing networking and education opportunities. Now, in a callback to episode 2 of this series, it turns out that Georgie and Arthur Gaskin were very close friends of the Morris family, and it's entirely likely that May was inspired to start making jewelry because of them. She most likely started designing and making jewelry around the turn of the century, and in her early work you can definitely see shades of influence from Georgie and Arthur Gaskin's designs. By 1906, her jewelry was being shown at the Arts and Crafts exhibition in London. So in just 5 or 6 short years, May was producing jewelry of such exceptional quality that it was being exhibited with the jewelry work of her peers. That does not surprise me because there is quite a bit of overlap in the skill set necessary to be a talented embroiderer and that necessary to be a talented jeweler. While May did have a failed marriage and, according to what I read, at least one other disastrous relationship with a man in her past, she did find her soulmate. In 1917, May began a relationship with Mary Lobb, who initially moved in to be her gardener, and they would stay together until Mary's death in 1938. During their time together, they traveled extensively, including 3 separate trips to Iceland, where May was absolutely obsessed with the landscape. After just over 2 decades of traveling and exploring the world with her partner, May died in 1938. And again, very little information about May Morris, although it makes me so happy to know that she found her ideal companion in Mary Lobb. Much like Marie Zimmerman, who we discussed in the first episode of this series, May Morris was living a rather unconventional life with a same-sex life partner at a time when that was something you simply did not talk about openly in public. But like so many women who were part of the arts and crafts movement, it seems that she was surrounded by friends and acquaintances who were both open-minded and progressive themselves. So perhaps this wasn't as big of a deal in her social circle as it would have been for somebody else. You really would expect to know more about the life of the Nepo baby of the arts and crafts movement, and I don't say that disparagingly. Taking a look at either her embroidery or her jewelry design work, it's incredibly clear that May Morris was very talented. Did she have her family's recognition and money to help her focus on her artistic pursuits? Absolutely. But this was not just the rich child of an artist coasting on their parents' laurels. Mae Morris was an incredibly talented artist in her own right, and she is justly remembered as one. Of course, as time goes on and we uncover more about Mae Morris's life and her design work, more and more of the pieces that are incorrectly attributed to her father are being rightfully attributed to Mae herself. Most of this is embroidery, but what about the jewelry? Like many of her contemporaries making jewelry in the arts and crafts movement, there is an emphasis on natural motifs. There is a lot of obvious medieval and Renaissance design inspiration, and those beautiful, slightly muted and softer colors that you see from so many other arts and crafts jewelers. You've got greens, blues, the soft whites of opal, moonstone, and pearl, and in Mae's case, what seems to be a deep love for the reddish purple of garnets. And while the nature motifs are a little bit less obvious in her work than in that of her contemporaries, you do see the presence of leaves, flowers, and intertwining vines. She seems to have had a fondness for a heart-shaped cabochon cut, which I think is incredibly charming. And as I said, in many of her pieces, especially early ones, you can see the influence that she took from Georgie and Arthur Gaskin's designs. In my opinion, the applied flowers are almost a direct reference to Georgie Gaskin's jewelry design. Unfortunately, similar to how we don't have much information about Mae Morris's life, we don't have that many examples of her jewelry to look at, and it's possible that this is because she just didn't produce that much jewelry. Mae Morris was busy with a lot of things in her lifetime. Like almost everyone else who was a part of the arts and crafts movement, she wasn't restricted to one medium. She was not only an embroiderer and a jeweler, but she taught as well, traveling extensively in order to teach workshops on embroidery and embroidery design. This, coupled with working for Morris & Company in an advisory role, gives me the sense that perhaps Mae Morris did not actually have that much time to spend sitting at a jeweler's bench. But the pieces that she did create tell me that Mae Morris was a very technically proficient jeweler. They are remarkably well executed, and from what I can tell, they were made entirely by her hand. She was not designing these pieces and having someone fabricate them for her. She was designing them and then fabricating them herself. I did get to see a few of her pieces at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London last month, and not only did they have a few pieces made by Mae, but they had the contents of Mae's personal jewelry collection, which included some beautiful pieces that she inherited from her own mother. Her mother was an artist's model, and she had been given quite a few pieces of jewelry by members of the pre-Raphaelite movement, including Rossetti. It does seem like perhaps there had been a love affair between Rossetti and Mae's mother, and if that's the case, well, I don't think there was any bad blood, because eventually Rossetti would go on to paint a beautiful portrait of Mae. I'm just popping back in here after editing this video to say that I have since learned that there was almost definitely an extended affair between Jane Morris and Dante Gabriel Rossetti, most likely occurring while Jane Morris was married to William Morris, and that this affair was what probably led to a falling out between Rossetti and William Morris, who were, up until that point, pretty close friends. So forget what I said about there not being any bad blood. Since that's all the information I have about Mae Morris, let's move on to the next incredibly talented woman that we're going to be talking about in this episode, Dorrie Nossiter. Dorrie Nossiter was born on June 29th, 1893 in Birmingham, England. Once again, we don't know much about her life, but what we do know I got from an exceptional website, dorrienossiter.co.uk, which I will be linking in the episode notes. This was an invaluable resource. I was shocked to find that someone had compiled so much hard-to-find information on Dorrie Nossiter, and I was incredibly grateful to have come across it, because many of these women have just a two-paragraph snippet on Wikipedia to go off of. Tragically, Dorrie's father would pass away 1 year after her birth in 1894, prompting her family to move to Yardley. Here, Dorrie attended the Camp Hill School for Girls from 1906 to 1908, and we start to get the first inklings of what might have inspired Dorrie Nossiter's later jewelry designs. Sometime around 1907, she was given a book called Plant Forms and Design as a prize for a drawing contest. She kept this book through her entire life and used it as inspiration for future jewelry designs. In fact, her physical copy of the book shows notes that she made in the margins. This was going to be the start of Dorrie Nossiter's veritable obsession with plants. After this, she attended the Municipal School of Art in Birmingham from 1910 to After this, she attended the Municipal School of Art in Birmingham from 1910 to 1914, and when her mother remarried to the painter William Gough, the entire family moved to Dorset. In Dorset, the family garden became a major source of inspiration for Dorrie. Here's a painting of the garden by William Gough, and it does look remarkably charming and idyllic. Dorrie, her mother, and her sister were avid gardeners, and Dorrie must have spent quite a bit of time outdoors in this charming garden. In 1922, Dorrie married Ernest Guy Robinson, who apparently also went by Sam, and Dorrie kept her maiden name, which maybe wouldn't have been as shocking as when Jessie King kept her maiden name over 2 decades earlier, but I do think that was still a pretty unusual thing to do in 1922. Thanks to the Dorrie Nossiter website that I found, we do have photos of Dorrie and Ernest, aka Sam. By the late 1920s, the couple had moved to London, and it seems that shortly after this, Dorrie opened a studio. She was exhibiting her work at the Walker's Gallery in London from 1935 to 1939, including in an exhibit of 4 women artists that was attended by the Queen. It does seem that Dorrie was very good at keeping up with trends. She was designing over multiple decades, and her work evolved along with the general tastes of the time. Unlike some of her contemporaries whose work looked the same from beginning to end, Dorrie's work changed from one decade to the next. By the 1950s, she was collaborating and designing with dressmakers and textile companies, including Betty Barclay, who was not a person, but a dress company, as well as Betty and Jen Marchington, who were textile designers. One of my favorite details about Dorrie Nossiter's work is that she gave all of her pieces names, which is an intriguing view into how she saw her own jewelry. She considered herself a storyteller. Some of the names that I've seen for her various pieces include Quiet Evening, Treasure Trove, Robin Hood, A Bicycle Made for Two, She'd Done Him Wrong, and Prelude to Adventure. I love this naming convention. Naming a piece this way is so evocative because you are setting up the idea of what emotions these pieces should provoke, and you are telling the viewer what you want this piece to be seen as. Dorrie Nossiter was friends with 2 of the other women on my list, Sybil Dunlop, who we're going to be talking about next, and Amy Sandheim, who we're going to be talking about in my Patreon exclusive video. The 3 of them were referred to as the Good Time Girls. And that's everything we know about Dorrie Nossiter's life, but what about the jewelry? Well, before I even get into breaking down the aesthetic, I have to make a very important note and tell you all that Dorrie Nossiter's work is very often confused for the work of Sybil Dunlop, who we're going to be talking about next. I want you to keep this in mind while we are talking about and looking at her pieces, because there are quite a few similarities, but in my opinion, there are more differences. There have been many cases of misattribution, and the Dorrie Nossiter website that I found has made it their mission to help educate people about the differences between the two so that Dorrie Nossiter's work can rightfully be attributed to her. While 1 or 2 Sybil Dunlop pieces have mistakenly been attributed to Dorrie Nossiter, more often than not, Dorrie's pieces are mistakenly attributed to Sybil Dunlop, and this has led to an avalanche of misunderstanding. The more Dorrie Nossiter pieces that are mistakenly attributed to Sybil Dunlop, the more people will believe that that was in fact Sybil's style. So I will be making a point to talk about the major differences in their work. I think once you are familiar with both of their styles, it does become pretty easy to tell them apart. After we talk about Sybil Dunlop, I will show some of their pieces side by side so that you can get a better understanding of why they're mistaken for each other, but how they truly differ in their design work. Dorrie's pieces involve a lot of colored gemstones. Clusters of colored gemstones. She loved brightly colored gems, and she was not shy about putting them very close to each other. Many of her pieces include both cabochon cut and faceted gems. This is something I really love about arts and crafts jewelry, this combining of different cuts, and something that I'm also very fond of in Dorrie's pieces is this combination of bezel and prong settings. All of those tiny little prongs clustered around these cleaner bezel set pieces makes for a very visually arresting design. There is this recurring motif of a crescent shape. These are usually brooches, and they are usually meant to be worn so that the gems are on either the right or the left side, not the top or the bottom. And there is a recurring motif of grape bunches. I adore grape bunches in jewelry, and I love seeing Dorrie Nossiter's pearl grapes, little silver and gold bead grapes, gemstone grapes. This is something that, to me, makes it easy to pick out when a piece is made by Dorrie Nossiter versus Sybil Dunlop, these recurring grapes. Every one of Dorrie Nossiter's pieces has some kind of botanic or plant-inspired motif, if not an outright plant design. There are not only grape bunches, but often large flowers. As I mentioned, her work evolved through the decades, possibly more than any of her contemporaries, and by the late 40s and 1950s, her pieces are very much of their time. They have that beautiful 40s and 50s deco quality, although they still retain enough hallmarks of arts and crafts design that I don't shy away from calling them arts and crafts jewelry. There is one piece in particular that I am absolutely obsessed with, but it seems to only exist in photographs at this point. This is an ear cuff, and this is a photo of Dorrie wearing it. The description for this ear cuff calls it a mesh of rubies, emeralds, and pearls, and I wish we could see this in full color. This is such an unusual piece of jewelry, not only for its time, but for now. I think that this ear cuff, more than any other Dorrie Nossiter piece, really speaks to her love for fantastic forms and ideas. That sense of romance that led to Dorrie naming all of her pieces with evocative names like She Done Him Wrong, and this idea that jewelry can transcend just mere ornamentation and become something otherworldly. Later in her career in the 1950s, some of Dorrie Nossiter's pieces became absolutely massive. I mean, these are statuesque pieces of jewelry. Many of the designers and jewelers that we talk about always wow me with how petite their pieces actually are in person, but Dorrie Nossiter's work is not petite. Her pieces, even before these massive necklaces, which were part of the Hollywood Glamour collection, are large and they are loud. They are for someone who is not shy about their jewelry, somebody who wants to wear a ruby, emerald, and pearl-encrusted ear cuff. Dorrie herself seems to have been an incredibly charming individual. Not only is she beautiful, the photos make that very clear, but there are accounts written by her niece, who Dorrie was very close to, that paint the picture of a woman who was maybe just a little bit eccentric, a little bit otherworldly, but glamorous and with a distinct sense of self and personal style. Based on the information that I found, it does seem that maybe initially Dorrie was designing and fabricating this jewelry, and that later on she employed the work of two stone setters, the King brothers. It is unclear whether she was still fabricating the settings and then simply having the stone set for her, and it is exquisite work. I can see why she employed stone setters, or if she was outsourcing the fabrication as well. But I do believe it is safe to say that early on in her jewelry career, Dorrie was at least fabricating all of the settings. Of all of the women we've discussed and will be continuing to discuss, Dorrie Nossiter's designs are the ones that would become the most modern as time went on. While we can still call the 1940s and 1950s designs arts and crafts, they don't have that early 20th century feel, but look a little bit more polished, and I don't want to use the word refined because it implies that the other pieces we've talked about are not. Maybe it would be better to say they look a little bit more commercially made, or perhaps a little bit more trend-driven. And I don't say that to disparage them, they are incredibly beautiful. But they veer away a little bit from the arts and crafts aesthetic that we've been talking about for 3.5 episodes. So now let's talk about Dorrie's friend and the woman whose work hers is most often confused for, Sybil Dunlop. We know basically nothing about Sybil Dunlop. I couldn't even find an actual birth date for her. What we do know is that she was born in 1889 in Hampstead, London, to Scottish parents, and that she finished her schooling in Brussels, which is where she also started to learn how to make jewelry. She established a workshop in London in the early 1920s and soon took on her chief craftsman and fabricator, William Nathanson. One little tidbit that I could find about Sybil Dunlop is that she was unusual and that she was known for wearing a kaftan and Russian fur boots. Sybil's workshop closed in 1939 due to the start of World War I, and unfortunately, due to poor health, Sybil never returned to fabricating jewelry. Despite this, after the war ended, her chief craftsman, William Nathanson, did take over the studio and continued producing jewelry under her name until the 1970s. While there are many similarities between the pieces that he produced post-war and the pieces that Sybil designed pre-war, I do think there is an obvious difference in the pieces that Nathanson designed versus the ones designed by Sybil Dunlop. Sybil died in 1968, and while we don't know very much about her life, we do know a lot about her jewelry. Sybil was the pioneer of what became known as the carpet of gems style. This, perhaps, is one of the reasons why Dorrie Nossiter's work is so often confused for Sybil Dunlop's. This geometric layout of stones placed very closely together, but there are major differences in the way both women executed this idea. Sybil Dunlop's carpet of gems involved having gemstones specially cut to fit each and every design. These stones were cut for Sybil in Germany up until World War II, and they were cut in specific shapes and sizes in order to be laid out in these very symmetrical geometric designs. While Dorrie Nossiter's work does not rely on symmetry, Sybil Dunlop's does. This is not a hard and fast rule. There are Dorrie Nossiter pieces that are symmetrical and a few Sybil Dunlop pieces that aren't. But for the most part, every single Sybil Dunlop piece is remarkably symmetrical. The designs include a wide range of colors, including using contrasting colors to great effect. And a recurring shape that you see through a lot of Sybil Dunlop's work is this beautiful crescent moon shape. She mostly used cabochon cut gems, but every once in a while you do see a mix of faceted and cabochon cuts. Not as many mixed pieces as Dorrie Nossiter, but still that mixing of smooth and faceted shapes is there. I do think that Sybil Dunlop's work is, stylistically, unlike any of her contemporaries. Many of her pieces look incredibly fresh and modern by today's standards. I think this carpet of gems style is still very sought after and mimicked by many designers today. She crafted a wide variety of pieces, including one of my personal favorites, this set, which comes with a tiara frame so that the necklace can be mounted and worn as a head ornament. The pieces that Sybil designed herself in the 1920s and 1930s are incredibly elaborate. There are some simpler ones, but even the simple pieces are deceptively so. They are not actually simple when you take a closer look. And the pieces that would go on to be made by Nathanson when he took over the studio in the 1940s are maybe a little bit less elaborate. They are still beautiful. They still involve a lot of the design hallmarks of Sybil Dunlop's work, but there are no longer these incredible pieces that look like a mosaic of multicolored stones. Sybil Dunlop's work does also include some nature motifs, but honestly, it's really more about the geometry. It's about the cuts of the stones, how they fit together, and how the colors play off of each other. So yeah, you see a leaf every once in a while, but for the most part, that's not the focus. In fact, when I see a piece attributed to Sybil Dunlop that is heavy on the nature motifs, I assume that it is in fact a Dorrie Nossiter piece that has been misattributed. Same goes for asymmetrical gemstone groupings. If I find a brooch or a ring or a necklace where the gemstones do not mirror each other perfectly from one side to the next, that's probably not a Sybil Dunlop piece. It's clear when looking through her work that asymmetry just was not her thing. And I did say I was going to show some pieces side by side so that you can get a better feel for how these two designers differed in their work. Here are some Dorrie Nossiter pieces next to some Sybil Dunlop pieces. These pieces are the ones that I consider to be most similar to each other and the ones where you can see why they might be misattributed, but still, there's a major difference in their designs. Yes, there are those curling vines and that open scrollwork motif, but that's kind of where the similarities end. When I see a piece that is marked as being made by Sybil Dunlop, but it doesn't feel right to me, I ask myself, does it have grape bunches? If so, it's Dorrie Nossiter. Is it a crescent shape with gems clustered on one side of the crescent? It's not Sybil Dunlop, it's Dorrie Nossiter. Are there different gems on one side of the piece than the other? It's not Sybil Dunlop, it's Dorrie Nossiter. Are there a lot of leaves? Not Sybil Dunlop, it's Dorrie Nossiter. And the more you look at these pieces, the more you can get a real sense for who did what. And while I do understand that most of these misattributions come from people who may not be completely familiar with the work of one or the other, I do agree with the wonderful person who created DorrieNossiter.co.uk that it is important to make these distinctions, and that it's important for Dorrie's work to be labeled as Dorrie's work. I don't think either of these women would have wanted their work to be misattributed. And now that you can probably pick out a Dorrie Nossiter in a sea of Sybil Dunlops, let's move on to the last woman that we're discussing in this episode, Ella Louise Naper. Born Ella Louise Champion on February 9th, 1886 in Charlton, England. Once again, very little information available. We know that Ella attended the Camberwell School of Arts and Crafts from 1904 to 1906, and we know that she studied under the incredible Frederick James Partridge, a man whose talents rival those of René Lalique. Under Partridge's tutelage, Ella learned a variety of techniques for working in metal, wood, and enamels. Ella was heavily influenced by the Art Nouveau movement and very inspired by the work of C.R. Ashby, as well as, of course, the work of her teacher, Partridge. In 1906, on a trip to Branscombe in Devon, along with her teacher and a few other students, she met the architect and painter Charles Napier. They were married 4 years later in 1910. The couple would move to Cornwall, where they became active members of an artists' colony known as the Newlyn School. This was a group of painters working predominantly in the fishing village of Newlyn, who were sort of the British equivalent to the California plein air movement, where their focus was painting from nature in the outdoors. Ella would work from home, producing decorative enamel and horn jewelry. Here is a very charming photo of Ella sitting at her bench carving a piece of horn. And she sold her work at exhibitions as well as through the Liberty's department store, which I discussed in the previous episode. As part of this artists' community, Ella was not shy about collaborating with other creatives, and during World War II, she collaborated with the painter Laura Knight to create a series of painted and enameled plaques and pieces of jewelry, including this lovely piece featuring a dancing couple. Ella was also an artist's model and was the subject of an incredibly controversial painting by Laura Knight called Self-Portrait with Nude. This painting was executed when Ella was 36 years old, and it wasn't shocking because it featured a nude woman, but because it featured another woman painting the nude woman. Ella, like so many artists in the arts and crafts movement, was not only a jewelry designer, she was also a ceramicist and a painter. And in the early 1920s, she started Lamorna Pottery with Kate and Emily Westrop. It would go on to produce pottery until 1935. Ella continued to create jewelry and other forms of art until her death in 1972. Out of all of the women we've talked about, Ella is the one that veers the most into Art Nouveau aesthetic. Some of her jewelry is definitely just straight up arts and crafts style, but so much of it is also Art Nouveau. This is not the slightest bit surprising given who her teacher was. His work, similarly, straddles this line between Art Nouveau and arts and crafts, often veering further into Art Nouveau territory. And he also had this deep love for horn, a material that I think is incredibly underrated. Horn had some incredibly attractive qualities that made it a great choice for the sort of work that Ella loved to do. Along with a soft, warm glow, it has a beautiful translucence, and it can be manipulated by heating and molding it into various shapes. René Lalique famously took advantage of these qualities as well, making many beautiful head and hair ornaments out of horn, and Ella would go on to do the same. Most of her work that we have record of is, in fact, molded horn hair ornaments. As a lover of hair ornaments, her pieces really speak to me. They are graceful, they are ethereal, they are carrying on the tradition of her teacher, Partridge, who created two incredibly famous and incredibly stunning horn tiaras. And I think they're quite unusual in the scope of the pieces that we've talked about so far. She did, of course, work in metals as well, using a lot of silver and enamel, and something that I think is really interesting about Ella's work is that it seems like she had a propensity for using multiple shades of the same color in one piece. You can see that in this enameled necklace, as well as this brooch. Maybe I'm biased because I just love horn hair pieces so much, but I think there's a very otherworldly and calming quality to her work. Some of these combs could be called masterpieces of Art Nouveau design. There are not that many examples of her work available out there, but from what we can see, it's clear that her work is not only beautifully designed, but it is incredibly well executed. It is not the slightest bit surprising that her work would have been sold at Liberty's. It would have fit in perfectly with the other jewelry and accessories that they sold, including those made by her teacher. The lily pad or lotus leaf with the moonstone droplet seems to have been a favorite motif of hers. I have seen more than one example of these, including this piece, which looks like it is missing a few of its gemstones. And folks, that's it. We are wrapping it up. That is the end of episode 4 of Influential Women Jewelers of the Arts and Crafts Movement. If you have made it this far, congratulations, and thank you for sticking with me. I've had so much fun learning about these women, looking through their incredible jewelry, getting a feel for who designed what, the hallmarks of each woman's individual work, and for most of these women, I feel confident that I could correctly identify their work. Perhaps after watching or listening to these 4 episodes, you have found a favorite jeweler of your own. As I've said, there were more women on this list that I can't get to in this episode, and they are unfortunately women that we have even less information about than the ones I keep complaining we have so little information about. So I will be making a video for my Patreon members about Amy Sendheim, Phoebe Triquare, Ernestine Mills, and then one that I completely forgot to mention earlier, Edith Linnell. There are 4 more women whose work I think is worth looking at, and if you would like to see those videos, you can join me on patreon.com/ancienthistoryjewelrystories. I'm going to be making that video available to all members, both free and paid, but usually the good stuff is reserved for the paid Patreon members. There are multiple tiers of membership with different benefits, including a monthly roundup where I put up a little post with things that didn't make it into my content for the previous month, along with a questions and answers chat and occasional polls to help me determine what the topics of future videos and podcasts should be. And for now, until it becomes too long of a list, all paid Patreon members get a shout out at the end of my podcast episodes. If you would like to see my jewelry, the pieces that I make using mostly ancient techniques and always inspired by history, you can find those at shopmoonhoney.com. If you would like to watch my short form videos, they are 3 minutes or shorter. You can find those on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube under the username moonhoney.jewelry, and on Facebook. The Facebook page is just Moonhoney Jewelry. If you want some merch for the podcast, you can find that by going to shopmoonhoney.com and navigating to the Ancient History Jewelry Stories page. And I already mentioned my Patreon, but again, that is patreon.com/ancienthistoryjewelrystories. And very important, I keep forgetting to mention this on the podcast, but I did write a book. It is coming out in November. I am very proud and very excited. It's a book about birthstones. The book is called Birthstone Stories by Melise Oscar Dessler, and you can pre-order it from your favorite independent bookstore by going to bookshop.org, or you can pre-order it from our corporate overlords over at Amazon, Target, and Barnes & Noble. The book is beautifully illustrated by a very talented artist who is a real human being who used actual pencils and watercolors. No AI nonsense here, so it is going to be gorgeous. And because I've got a physical copy of it already, I can tell you it came out beautiful. All right, that's that. Those are all the plugs. I'm officially out of breath. As always, thank you for listening or watching. Thank you for being here, and I will see you in a few weeks for more ancient history jewelry stories. Now it is time to thank my paid Patreon members. As always, thank you so much. I love you all from the bottom of my heart. I really appreciate you supporting me in this crazy jewelry adventure. A huge thank you to Jennifer Baker, Amy Radner, Jennifer Crosscree, Mink Rose, Colsey Tucker, Bonnie Glass, Mimi Fondren, Megan Rose Thomas, Stannis Fluoride, Beth, Catherine Elizabeth, Magda Chope, Connor, Michelle Dunphy, Angela Wade, Aaron Atkinson, Aaron, Liz Bouchette, Flying Chef, Mary Lee, Emmy J. Makes, Julie Spradley, Armored Chocobo, Deborah Hansen, Kate, Dilara Özkardeşler, Rivka McCormack, Miranda Schaefer, Lindsay Breeze, Sarai, Laura Hastings Brownstein, Tiff, Susanna Ress, Uncle Mike and Aunt Jody, Jason Russ, Molly, Sarah Pounders, Michael D. Clifford, Marianne, Sarah Hackett, Kat Peterson, Carrie, Teresa Hansen, Martha Garcia, Petty Crocker, Jen Gilligan, Laura Rose, Francine Cabreja, Evelyn McElroy, Mira, Rosemarie, Missy Poff, Detch, Gabriel Asda-Sarson, Jennifer Foster, Lindsay Reeple, Renee Ondine, Jessica Worthington, Kathleen Pierce, Julie Graham, Bayal Lee, and Tu Min. That list is starting to get unwieldy, but that is a wonderful problem to have. Thank you so much for your support.